no indigenous person is seen as a settler. I grew up, let's say, most of my early childhood life in America. If a Native American from a specific tribe goes and lives in their reservation or in their native land, they're not considered a settler. So a Jew living in Judean Samaria should not be considered a settler. That doesn't mean that every Native American is going to be a good person. And if they decide to do something immoral or illegal, they should be called out for it. And if a Jew living in Judea does something immoral and illegal, they should be called out for it. Which, by the way, you said, I spoke to a settler and this guy said this horrible thing about Palestinians. That doesn't represent all Jews living in Judea and Samaria. I can mention many horrible things that Palestinians have said.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, for sure.
I would never say that that's what represents the Palestinian people, because I know Palestinians. I've been working for Palestinians for over 10 years to try to build unity in this land by real grassroots activists, because none of us trust our governments, not the Israeli government, not the Palestinian Authority, not Hamas. It will have to come from the bottom up. The difference between my side and the Palestinian side is I have the freedom to speak. I have the freedom to say whatever I want. On the Palestinian side, I constantly have to blur their faces in videos I make with them or in posts, or I have to hide their identity in order to protect them. Now, I do want to speak about Al-Aqsa. You mentioned very clearly, but I want to expand on what you just said for the viewers to understand. Al-Aqsa is not the Dome of the Rock golden structure that we see in all pictures that says Al-Aqsa.
The mosque.
Right. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is the gray mosque nearby. Now, no one is saying that that area, specifically where the gray brownish mosque is where the temple was. People are debating whether it's where the Golden Dome is or where the trees are nearby. Now, if it's where the trees are nearby, potentially we could have a temple next to this Golden Dome and there would be no issue. Or maybe one day this Golden Dome becomes just a bit bigger. It's cut from the bottom and lifted up, or there's several structures. There's many solutions to be found. But for the Jewish people, the temple is not a temple just for Jews. It very clearly states in the Torah that it's a temple for all who accept Hashem, for every single nation. And in fact, this land, this piece of land that actually I see from my own window right now, so it was not called Al-Aqsa always. It was actually in Arabic called Bet al-Maqdisi, which represents Bet HaMikdash. So even from the Arab side, they always knew that this was a place that was the Bet HaMikdash. But a future reality for the third temple will be a solution that will work also for the Muslim sides. And whatever that temple will look like, it will be a space for all those who submit to Hashem, who submit to Allah, who reject idolatry, and who submit to oneness, to be able to come and pray in respectful ways, not just for Jews. In terms of self-determination, there's a difference between individual self-determination and collective self-determination. Obviously, the Christians in this land are not going to get self-determination, and the Armenians and the Cherkessian and the Bedouins. It's not because you're a separate population that you all get the rights to create a country. So, with the Hispanics in Miami, because they've moved into Miami and are a different demographic, they're now going to create their own country because they're different than the rest of the population. That's not how it works. Palestinians are a collection of individuals who have ties to this land. That's why, according to Palestinians, you can be a Jew before 1948 living there and you're considered a Palestinian. So self-determination for a vast group of people who have had an experience is not self-determination. Individually, they should be granted the rights to go back to the lands that they may have been kicked out from, that they have deeds to, that they own, right of return, but not as a collective. There was never a Palestinian state. There was never a Palestinian civilization. There was never a Palestinian king. There was never a reality called a country of Palestine. It was a region that was the colonial name given by the Romans as an act of colonization, because Palestinian in Hebrew literally means invaders. And so the Romans renamed our land to invaded land, which is called Palestine. Fast forward, the Romans leave, different colonial powers take control. They always remain this land, Palestine. Many Jews become converted to Islam. Many Arabs pour in. Many of them are not identifying with this term Palestinian, but only after 1948, where they didn't have a space to live in the land of Israel due to what the British had done to us. Now they're identifying with the other name that they've always known this land to be called, which is Palestine, which is why they're identifying as Palestinians. So I do believe from the river to the sea, and even potentially more with Jordan, because Jordan was always a part of this land, we can create a reality that lives for both. But there's a difference between collective self-determination and individual self-determination. To compare the Jews with Islam and Christianity, it's not correct, because Judaism is not a religion. A religion is a belief system in a God, deity, book, or prophet. So if you don't believe in the God, deity, book, or prophet, you're not a part of the religion. If you reject Jesus as a Christian, you're not a Christian. You reject Muhammad as a Muslim, you're not a Muslim. You reject Hashem and the Torah as a Jew, although a fundamental part of who we are, you are still a Jew. Judaism is the portable suitcase of an ancient civilization, and indigenous people from this land who lived in this land. Every piece of archaeology shows that we come from this land, and us coming back to that land is our revival of the most successful indigenous liberation movement that ever existed. Now, Hebrew has always been the official language of this land. The newspapers are in Hebrew, the TV stations are in Hebrew. This is the language of the land. Arabic comes from Arabia. But in every single sign, in every single official document, even on my own ID, there is Arabic under it, which, you know what? There's a large population here that at that time in 48 definitely didn't speak Hebrew. Today, a lot less. And I'm completely okay with Arabic being here. But imagine going to Saudi Arabia because you had a population of Jews who had migrated to Saudi Arabia and speak Hebrew, which would have never even put Hebrew as a secondary language, to make the case of why Arabic is the primary language in Arabia. That's crazy. Of course, Hebrew is going to be the main language in Israel. But the way that document was done for the national document that you're talking about was done in a poor way to begin with, and it was created to incentivize because you didn't really need to change the status quo to begin with. In terms of occupied and occupier, the Palestinian Authority occupies Area A and portions of Area B. Hamas once occupied not too long ago Gaza. They're occupiers. And if you're using the term occupier in terms of control, then yes, there's many different kind of occupiers. Now, is there one that has more control, more power, more ability to create change? Absolutely. And that's Israel, which is why Israel has to stop being schizophrenic. The decision of building in Gaza and then removing Jews out of Gaza, like, just decide what you want. You talk about a two-state solution, but you continue building in Judea and Samaria. Just decide what you want. And you're right. That's what Palestinians are saying. Decide what you want. Just give me a better reality. However, I will disagree that the vast majority of Palestinians will always reject the two-state solution because for them, this land is sacred, just like it is for me. So I will defend their honor that this land for them has to be one civilization. Now, how do we create that? You know, it's a big problem. I speak to the Jewish side. I'm constantly speaking to Jewish communities, and they say, how do we create a reality that Palestinians will be able to have the right of return, which doesn't mean all Palestinians will come back to this land, but let's say a portion of them wants to go and move because some of them have their own lives. And you include those that are in the West Bank, and you include those into Gaza. We're not even talking about those in refugee camps in Lebanon and in Jordan and the majority of the Jordanian population. How do you maintain a Jewish majority? Well, there's a few things that have to happen. These are two problems that come to the Jewish people. Problem number one is demographics, and problem number two is culture. How can you bring in populations of people who currently, where we're standing right now, most Palestinians in the diaspora hate Israel and are probably more supportive of Hamas than not? How do you bring in that population? Well, the first thing you need to do for demographics is do something you need to do unrelated even to this conflict, is bring back the rest of the tribes of Israel. Today, the Jewish population, the 15, 16 million Jews that we are around the world, are about 15 to 16 million. And we're the descendants of 2.5 tribes. There's 9.5 other tribes of our nation that still exist out there that are in Africa, in Asia, in South America. Today, their descendants are about 500 million. Let me just finish this point, Jake. I know that you want to get in there. This is my final point, and then we can go on. Today, the descendants of the 9.5 tribes of Israel are 500 million. Now, not all of them are identifying as Jews. Most of them have been converted to Islam and Christianity over time. Those who still identify as Jews are about 20% of that population. Those who wanted to make Aliyah to Israel, about half. So we're talking about a population about 50 million people. If that population was brought back to Israel, which shouldn't be brought back to fix this demographic problem, they should be brought back because this is the people who are indigenous to the land and that have every right to come back to this land. Then, to the Jewish perspective, there's actually no more demographic problem. And every Palestinian would not create a risk of threatening the idea that it could also be democratic and also Jewish. Now, how do you change the culture? To change the culture, we need to act like Malik Daoud. We need to act like Melech David, like King David. King David had two attributes of himself. He was ruthless against enemies, and he was extremely compassionate about every single civilian that was living under his kingdom, including and especially non-Jews. And the problem is that Israel's doing neither. It's super weak against Hamas. We, for so many years, allowed them to keep shooting at us, allowed Hezbollah to keep shooting at us, allowed them to manipulate their population, to brainwash their population, to do all sorts of horrible stuff that we should have even cared for the Palestinians living there, not for the sake just of the Jewish people. We're weak on terror and we're weak on compassion. And this is something that Israel started now. Now that we're in Gaza, now that we're in Judea and Samaria, we need to create freedom of speech, invest in education, invest in infrastructure, in sewage, in roads, in job opportunities. And if the experience of the Palestinians was one that Israel is not here to control you and maintain the status quo of your suffering, but to actually fix the source problems that exist to give you a better reality, they would respect Israel, because it's not inherent in Palestinians to just hate Jews. They hate us because they think that we're the source of their problem. But if we became the source of their solution, the reality would exist differently. Now, if the Nazis can go from killing 6 million Jews to 10 years later, that same civilization supporting the state of Israel, definitely between Israelis and Palestinians as cousins, within 10 years, if we make the right moves, we could change that reality and build a reality where there's one civilization which allows us to keep what we need, and for them to keep what we need, and for us to get what we want, and for them to get what they want as well.
Can you guys both go another 30 minutes?
I gotta bounce. I gotta bounce because it's 1 hour.
You gotta bounce?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I give a final thing?
Yeah. Has Rudy convinced you on anything? Has he convinced you the West Bank is not apartheid?
No, I admire his passion, and I could understand where he's coming from. And as a person who is just a student, but who's tried to be fair and empathetic and gone there and listen to folks, I understand that narrative. Now, with that being said, the final thing that I'll say is the one thing that Israel has never tried in its history. I'm talking about as a modern nation state. It has never tried to end the occupation of the Palestinian people, specifically in East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza. That's one thing it has never tried. And I believe that that is the source of the problems. That if Israel was to end the occupation of the Palestinian people and to give them a path towards self-determination and freedom, I believe the situation will be remarkably different and better for all people, especially the Palestinians. For those who are watching, I do not know if I've convinced you. I don't know if Rudy's convinced you. I'm pretty sure if you already came in here with your preset ideas, they've been entrenched. But for a lot of folks who are watching, imagine that you live your entire life with hopes and dreams of freedom, of self-determination, of equality. And imagine if you're denied that. How would you feel? And the Palestinian people in this moment have been denied that reality. They will dream, they will keep dreaming, they will keep hoping. They remind me much of Jews back in the day, Jews in the diaspora, Jews who were wandering, Jews who had dreams and hopes of Zion, right? No matter what happened to the Jews, no matter how oppressed they were, no matter how much they were discriminated against, they still held on to the dream. And I think that's what people need to realize, and Israelis need to realize, is no matter what Israel and Netanyahu and Smotrich do to the Palestinians, if they kick out the Palestinians of Gaza, if they force them to go to Egypt and Jordan, if they ethnically cleanse the land, Palestinians exist. They have always existed. They will always exist. They will never forget. People at the end of the day want to be free. And that is a land where I think if we want to just limit it to two peoples, right? For the sake of this conversation, Palestinians and Israelis, no one's going back. All right. I think Rudy and I will agree to that. No one's going back. The only future for those people is a shared future together, whether that's two state or one state. And I believe increasingly, Jake, as you have seen in America, especially in the past year, this young generation of Americans, the polls are skewed. Like 60 to 70% of Americans are siding more and more with Palestinians, even conservatives, people like Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson's audience, right? Increasingly, Israel is becoming a pariah by aligning itself with this expansionist type of a messianic worldview where they believe it all belongs to us. But it doesn't. And I believe the United States is also complicit with its kind of almost unconditional support for the modern state of Israel, even though they engage in what I think is currently a genocide and war crimes, not just my words, but also the words of the ICC and the ICJ.
What about Rudy's comments about Amnesty and the anti-Semitism?
Yeah, and with Amnesty International, look, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, some of the most respected international human rights groups, right? Do you think they're anti-Semitic? No, I don't think they're anti-Semitic. What's the
quotes for? Are they the most respected or not?
Yes, holding defenders to Jews is a form.
Well, I know Israel doesn't like it, but Israel also doesn't like most human rights groups because they call it Israel. But what Israelis say, and I'll end on this, is that from the Israeli perspective, like, why are you always picking on us, right? There's all these other groups also. Yeah. And the reality is this, in America, and I'll explain this to Israelis watching, right? Like, why are you guys so concerned about Israel? Because for many Americans, we see that our money, Jake, goes to support this occupation. Our money goes to support these settlements. And we believe that in America, unlike, say, in Saudi Arabia, which is not a democracy, or, Syria, hopefully, inshallah, becomes a democracy. There's some good news out of Syria for the first time in a long time. Maybe our votes, maybe our voice can pressure our elected officials to do what me and Rudy actually agree on, is not support this, right? Maybe we can make a move, because let's be honest, Israel cannot continue on its path without U.S. support. Military support,
Rudy,
economic
do you accept
support.
that answer? People talk about Israel so much because U.S. dollars go towards Israel. Is that a reasonable?
Especially in the United States, for sure.
And I think the U.S. dollar should stay far away from this region, and we should all be able to benefit from being able to build together without the involvement of America. Look, at the end of the day, I agree what you say. I just disagree with how you're saying it. So when you say end the occupation of the Palestinian people so that they can have control of their land, what you mean by that is Palestinians should be able to live equally in this land from the river to the sea. That I agree. But when you say end the occupation, it's as if Israel has an intention of holding people down, controlling them, forcing them to be subjugated to different rules. And that's just not the reality of what's happened. There's a consequence to the wars that were waged against Israel. There's a consequence to what the British did. And we're all fall into this situation, but there's different forms of representation depending on the different lands that you live in. The Palestinians living in East Jerusalem chose not to have a passport. They have residency in Israel. They have every.
What's wrong with that explanation? I was shaking your head.
Sorry, go ahead, Rudy. Finish, and I'll respond.
It's just certain terms that trigger people, right? When Israelis hear the apartheid, genocide, ethnic cleansing, right away, they're not going to hear the Palestinian struggle, Palestinian suffering. And if we were actually more specific to what Palestinians go through, what does it mean to go through a checkpoint? You're trying to get to the hospital and you're stuck because you can't go because there's a checkpoint. And maybe there was a terror attack before which caused the checkpoint. But we need to be more specific as to what's happening in order to change those things. And when we're just using these like shallow terms that are from foreign conflicts and implying them here, it prevents actually the conversation from being able to go. And the reason for why the world hates us, and there's this obsession with all these different human rights organizations, all these international bodies, is because the world has always hated the Jews when we are not the Jews. They hate us because we ain't us. Once the Jews take on the responsibility of being themselves, of realizing that we are not a foreign power who've come into this land and just needs to be like every other country, but we are the indigenous people and need to live to the standards of our once great ancestor, King David, and to create a strong reality in this land, but that creates equality for all. Once we do that, the world will respect us. So I do agree that in order to change this, Israel has to look at itself and say, we didn't create this, but we can fix it. And if you can fix it and you do nothing about fixing it, you do have a responsibility that falls on you, and the world will always point at you for not doing so.
Wajahat, he's saying that the checkpoints suck and the oppression sucks, but they didn't exist for no reason. There's there's a cause and effect, and there was terrorism, so that's why they have these things. Is that fair?
It is. Look, the white Afrikaner in South Africa hated the word apartheid. The white American in segregated America hated the word segregation and white supremacy and racism. But nonetheless, they were accurate descriptions of the reality.
He's describing.
Would hate being called a colonialist, right? And
but that is the. I mean, of course, if you're in Israel right now, you would hate to, because no one sits there and goes, I'm not a colonizer, I'm not a settler.
Anyone here's why it's not those things
in America would hate to be called the settler too.
Look,
right?
Forget about hate, love. I'm saying he's giving it evidence for why it's not.
But I don't know if it's evidence. I think it's a perspective. Look, at the end of the day, you have to look. If you're watching, I'll say this again: go to the West Bank. Don't take my word for it. Some random brown guy who's Muslim, you probably think I'm biased. Okay, just go to the West Bank. And I want you, who's watching right now, if you can, you go visit the Jewish settlements, communities in the West Bank, and then you cross over and you spend time with the Palestinian communities. And you come back and you tell me. You try to go on some of those roads. You try, I'm a Muslim American born and raised in America. I have a blue passport. I'm a U.S. citizen. I got assaulted by the IDF because they mistook me for being Palestinian. I couldn't go into Al-Aqsa because the Druze soldier was in a bad mood. Sometimes you get just stuck at checkpoints, right? Just go and try to experience life as a Palestinian for one day, and then go look at how Israeli Jews, both in what is the nation state of the 67 borders and what is in, the Jews who live in the West Bank live. Clear as day. You come back, I almost guarantee you, suppose you have no dog in this fight, to use a lazy colloquialism, right? Suppose you're like, I'm just curious. You will come back just like so many Jews who have come back and said, I cannot support this. This is an injustice. Now, if you don't like to use the word apartheid, don't use the word apartheid. Unjust,
Rudy,
unfair.
You get his point.
Unequal.
Being there, you realize it sucks. They're treated poorly.
I constantly talk about the issues that Palestinians deal with and talk about how Israel needs to deal with. But you notice how you said, look at the Palestinian side in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, and look at the Jewish side in Israel. Well, how about the Arab and Muslim side in Israel? The Palestinian, I
went there also.
But the difference is that those that are living in Israel have full equal rights, and those that are living under the Palestinian Authority have horrible situation. And there's also involvement of Israel controlling that area, also because there's been terrorism and there have been 3 wars to try to ethnically cleanse our population after the context of a Holocaust that was committed on our people, after context of 2,000 years of genocides that have committed against our people. There's way more context that you're simplifying. I do agree with you that the situation for Palestinians is horrible. So let's focus on that rather than every time using that to then bring it to compare it to Israelis. Well, because you're not talking about Palestinians who suffer under the Palestinian Authority, or Palestinians who are executed by Hamas, or Palestinians who are subjugated to different rules in refugee camps in Lebanon, Jordan. Like, you only talk about Palestinians when it has to do with Israel. So let's talk about Palestinian struggles throughout the board. When there's times to criticize Israel, let's criticize what they've done and what they can do better, not use it to make it as there's sort of occupier, occupied. Good side, bad side. That's not how this conflict works. It's not zero-sum game. And as long as we're doing that, it's fueling the fire. There is a reality where Palestinians are suffering. I agree with you. And let's work to change that. But let's not fuel this conflict by using one population against the other.
Wajahat, I know you got to jump, but I know you want to say something. What do you want?
I agree with, I'll say what, we start with what I agree on. And I also, the reason why I have to jump is because we did an hour, we went above it, but it's fun. I will say,
this is a fantastic conversation, by the way.
Two things though. I appreciate you bringing on Rudy. A lot of folks that I talk to, they just jump in and they fight and they argue. I try my best. I'm too old. I'm a middle-aged dad. I drive a minivan and I shop at Costco. But I think at the very least, hopefully, even though Rudy and I have sharp disagreements on some things, I hope people could see that you can model a conversation, and you can see different perspectives and different narratives. I also agree with the zero-sum mindset. When it comes to Israel and Palestine, there is a zero-sum mindset for many folks in many communities who are invested in this. All or nothing. All or nothing is not going to work. Like I said before, and I'll say again, the futures of both folks, in my opinion, are intertwined. No one's going back. In this current reality, however, there's no symmetry. And I want people to really walk away with that. There is Israel and there's Palestinians. They're not on equal level. Israel has the power. It is very powerful. And in my opinion, it is abusing its power against Palestinians. Both those, the 20% that are citizens of Israel, who, if you talk to them, go talk to them. I did as well. They'll openly tell you, yeah, we're better off at least than our brothers and sisters who are occupied in the West Bank and Gaza, but we're not seen as equal here. There's discrimination against us. There's housing discrimination. Like even in the Knesset, they repeatedly keep bringing it up. Like, hey, please stop this discrimination.
Is that true, Rudy? You live there.
If you have a private community that is built to only keep Shabbat and that they discriminate against anyone who doesn't keep Shabbat, even if you're a secular Jew, then yes, they're also going to discriminate towards a Muslim who doesn't keep Shabbat to begin with. So that's, to use situations without giving the context is why it's problematic. But I do agree with everything else you were saying. The way you worded it, that round, I agreed with, because you were using language that talks about the struggles of Palestinians, the responsibility of Israel, without making it seem as if Israel has the intention to want to make Palestinians suffer, and as if the sole problem is on the Israel side, but the power and the responsibility is on the Israeli side, and I think that's something we agree on.
Sorry,
we can end on that note.
I cut you off, Wajahat, but
I said we can end on that note.
Okay,
if you want.
Well, did I cut you off?
And then Rudy and I can fight afterwards. We could have a dreidel off.
Yes. Well, yeah. So I did cut you off, Wajahat. There's something else you want to say?
No, it's fine. That's fine.
So thank you so much for this conversation. This is fantastic. Thanks, guys. And Wajahat, thanks for going. And both of you, thanks for going over time. I appreciate it.
And I hope your family's safe. There are these horrible fires, folks, in LA right now. So I know a lot of people are fleeing their homes, and Jake is a trooper. He did a makeshift studio from a special location in California to get it done. So, hopefully for anyone who's watching, and especially Jake, your family, I hope they're all safe from this horrific fire.
No, thanks, guys. This is amazing. I hope we could do a follow-up or something, because there's so many things to get into. And what I'm interested in doing is just reaching a shared understanding of reality, which we did in part and we didn't do. It's unclear whether, we haven't got to the bottom of these topics: genocide, apartheid, what to do with the hostages, and so on and so forth. But thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you, Jake, and thank you, Wajahat, for having this conversation. And if you ever do come back to Israel, would love to sit down with you and meet some other people that you've met last time.
Are you in Jerusalem?
I'm based in Jerusalem. I'm constantly traveling, but when I'm not traveling, I'm back home here in Jerusalem. Yes.
All right. Yeah. When I ever come back, we'll go have some delicious hummus. And by the way, the good thing is I only eat halal, but we could also eat kosher.
That's right.
So that's why I can eat well. And you said you're a Mizrahi background?
Yes. So
so good. Mizrahis saved the day. When we were visiting, we were like, listen, do not take us to Ashkenazi joints. No offense to Ashkenazi Jews, but if I have to choose, I'm going with the Mizrahi Jewish food 99% of the time.
All we've got is gefilte fish.
You can see how their taste buds were also colonized in the diaspora.
Yeah, we should do a podcast where we just rail on Ashkenazi Jewish food, and then Jake sits there and tries his best to defend it, and will lose that debate 9 out of 10 times.
Yes,
this is true.
This is great. This is fantastic. So I'll end the recording.
Very good.